thank you very much for joining us. We've got people from many corners of the globe, and many from national statistical institutes that we've come to know very well. And we also have some government departments as well. So thank you very much. Mike, I'm going to be joined today by my colleague, Mike Thompson. And again, many of you will have met Mike before. He's the product manager for Cantabular, which we'll be talking about. And Mike, could we please go, what I'd like to do first of all is just do a few little housekeeping things. So the first thing is, this is our welcome page to start off with. So one of the things to be aware of is that we switched off everyone's camera and microphone because there are quite a few people on the call. The event is being recorded, but your name will not appear. We've made a setting such that it doesn't appear. And finally, thirdly, we're going to be using Slido for questions, and we've put the code up here. If again, maybe perhaps one of my colleagues can pop that code into the text, into the chat box. Otherwise, I'll do it in 2 seconds. And finally, if you'd like to tweet about Cantabular, it's at Cantabular1. So with that, what I would like to do, if I may, is hand over to my colleague, Mike. But before I do, Mike, if anyone's experiencing problems hearing us, mind you, I suppose if they are, they won't hear me. We put a message up there to make sure that you've got to switch audio on in order to get into Zoom and to hear everyone. Mike, is it okay if I hand across to you, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anya. So what we're going to be talking about today is, to begin with, the launch of the ONS's Create a Custom Dataset product for the 2021 England and Wales census, which is powered by our software Cantabular. Talking about some of the history of the sort of historical context that fits within, and then introducing Cantabular as a product and what it can do, and what we're doing with the product in the future. So to begin with, just talking about, thinking about the recent ONS launch. So on the 28th of March, the ONS launched a new product called, for census, called Create a Custom Dataset. The link is at the top of this slide there. And what this does is it allows a user to build your own cross-tabulation from a wide selection of hundreds of available variables from the census. The cross-tabulation is created actually in real time from the microdata. So they're not pre-created, they're actually created when a user selects their variables. We generate the tabulation in real time. That's done by using automated disclosure checks that check the table produced automatically for disclosure risks, and also by using some automated perturbation algorithms. And that means that hundreds of millions of tables are available. And all of this is powered by our software, Cantabular. So a question, I guess, that you might ask is, well, why has the ONS done this? What's the value for them? And I think there are 2 big reasons for doing this. The first is speed. So after the last census in 2011, it took maybe 4 or 5 years for the ONS to publish all of the outputs that they wanted to publish. And the big reason for that is that they had to be checked and QA'd to a degree by hand. And so, 4 or 5 years is quite a long time along the scale of a census. It's almost halfway to the next one. So this new product, this Create a Custom Dataset product that is powered by our software Cantabular, as Jen Wolford, who's the Director of Population Statistics at the ONS, said, it's allowed them to release billions of anonymized statistics far more quickly than ever before. In fact, it's more or less twice as fast. So this time around, it's been about 2 years since the census to the publication of almost all of the data. So 2 years instead of 4 or 5. So about twice as fast. The other big reason for why the ONS wanted to go down this route was flexibility. So if you publish a set of tables that are predefined, then you're kind of you're making assumptions about the needs of your users. And one of the great things about this new tool is it puts the power, as Jen said, puts the power in the hands of users to find and download combinations of data that they are most interested in. And it's kind of sitting in the middle somewhere between your standard outputs, your pre-published stuff, and the kind of secure research service where you have let researchers go and do whatever they want with the data. So that is a bit about the ONS launch. And if you want to go and look at it yourself, you can use this URL here, ons.gov.uk/datasets/create. So I think it's useful to think about this work in a larger historical context, because essentially this is an advance in automation, and advances in automation have gone hand in hand with census for well over 100 years. So I want to take you back, if I may, to the late 1890s, and the development of this rather remarkable looking machine, which is an electrical tabulating machine that was created by the US Census, and specifically a guy called Herman Hollerith. So at the end of the 1880s, the US Census had the Census Bureau had a problem, because it was taking them almost as long as the gap between censuses to tabulate all the data, because it was being done completely by hand. So this machine was created to speed up the tabulation and the generation of outputs. And you can see down here, there's this little sort of, it looks like a waffle press almost. And what happened here is a punch card was put onto here, and a handle was pulled down, and some wires go through the holes in the punch card and connect up a circuit, which then triggers one of these dials or a few of these dials to increment. And these dials are effectively showing a kind of a cross tabulation of the census data. So this was the first time, this is one of the first times that punch cards were used to drive the operation of a kind of computing machine. And also it's kind of one of the first times that automation of census was undertaken. But I guess something about using a new system like this is that you have to get the outputs in the right shape. So there's new tasks to prepare data for your machine. So what we're looking at here is someone creating one of the punch cards. So it took a human they could create 500 punch cards a day for the 1890 census. So, but once all these punch cards were created to sort of represent the census data in a machine readable format, that meant that you get the benefit of this massively high throughput of data, of cross tabulations from the census. So I think it's interesting here that we're almost 150 years later, and we're still in the same business as Herman Hollerith was, of automating census outputs. But then I guess there's a question of, well, why are we still working on this problem of automating census outputs? And the answer is that the volume of data in the world is just going up and up and up exponentially. So this is a prediction from 2018 from IDC of the quantity of data in the world in 2025, which they said would be 175 zettabytes, which is an extremely large number. I think it's something like 1,000 billion gigabytes. And in the realm of official statistics, we see these kind of same dynamics. So we've got more and more data on individuals. There's more understanding of the potential of administrative data, and we're getting more demand from users for access to the underlying data. And I think, we're talking about automation here, but it's also worth thinking about when is automation the right choice, and when should we be thinking about augmentation? I think that automation is best when you're automating the drudgery and the things that should be predictable and repeatable tasks that computers can do really well to reduce errors. And then you leave the humans, the qualified statisticians, to focus on the analysis and the insight and the communication of the results. So this kind of story of automation that's been going on with the census for a very long time is something that we're kind of fitting into here, and what we've been doing for the ONS. So that brings us to our product Cantabular. So Cantabular is software that automates the publication processes, and it allows organizations to publish more data faster as a result. At the same time, protecting privacy, improving efficiency, it's easy to use, and it also improves reliability. So how it's actually working behind the scenes. So when a user sends a query for some census data, we have our software, Cantabular, which is loaded up with the confidential microdata, the row level data. And first of all, we have a piece of the software that checks, we call it the disclosure rules component, and it checks the query to see if it's allowed. If the query is allowed, then our cross-tabulation algorithm will run over the underlying row-level data, count up all the people, and produce a table, which is then perturbed. So some noise is added to the counts in the table. And then the perturbed table is checked against disclosure rules. And if it's safe to release, the table is released back to a user. So from a sort of an architectural point of view of what's going on, what different bits of the software we have. So with the ONS's product, the Create a Custom Dataset product, they have their user interface, and that's talking to Cantabular's API, which is in turn being fed by a data service and a metadata service. So everything that you just saw on this slide, all of this work happening here, the disclosure rules, the cross-tabulation and the perturbation, is all happening within this data service. And then alongside that, we have a metadata service, which holds reference metadata and also holds translations. And those two things get brought together in this single API. But we also have a user interface of our own that talks to our API and pulls together these two data sources in the same way. And what I'm going to do now is do a demo of that user interface to illustrate the functioning of the software in a bit more detail. So this is a version of Cantabular that we've loaded up with some synthetic data that is quite similar to the 2011 England and Wales census. And this is the homepage of the software, and I can create a custom table or I can find ready-made tables. If I opt to create a custom table, I then have a choice of population. So do I want to build a table for the usual resident population or household reference persons? Over on the right here, we're seeing a description of what is that population base and what variables are available for it. And this is coming from our metadata service. So if I select this population and continue, I then have a choice of geography variable. So how do I want to break down the data? I could break it down by region or county. I'm going to go with this local authority variable here. And again, I can look at what this local authority variable means. So there's a description, and I can see some examples of local authority underneath. So I'm going to go ahead with that choice. And then I can, if I wanted, I could get data just for specific local authorities. But in this case, I'm going to get data for every local authority in England and Wales. And now I have a choice of what variables to use in my cross-tabulation. So I can see all of the ones that are available in this synthetic data set. And here we've got age of individual. So there's a bunch of different classifications available here with different levels of detail. So the most detailed is this single year of age, but also we've got different classifications, and you can easily compare the difference between these. And I'm going to choose this 8 category classification. Once I've chosen that, I'm going to add ethnicity. So again, we've got 4 classifications available with different levels of detail. I'm going to use this 8 category classification here. And then finally, I'm going to add country of birth. And over on the right here, you might have spotted there's a little indicator of how many areas are passing confidentiality checks. And just to take you back to this slide, what's happening is that this piece of the software is giving feedback to the user interface to say how many areas are passing the disclosure rules checks. And at the moment, we can see that 348 out of 348 areas are passing. But if I add a more detailed classification of country of birth, you can see that we've hit some of disclosure rules limitations and some of the areas are being suppressed. But if I choose a less granular version of country of birth, so that's got 10 categories in rather than the 22 in this one, and you can see I'm getting almost all of the areas, and I can find out which areas are missing by looking at this list here. So assuming that that's all okay for me, then I can save and return. And at this point, I finished building my table. I'm getting a summary underneath of the contents, and I can see a quick preview of it beneath that. I can also, if I want, filter this to just some of the categories in the table. So I could look at just people aged over 16. for example. And we've recently added a feature to allow you to pivot the data. So by default, you see this view of the data with a single observation per row, but I can easily rearrange this table just by dragging and dropping my variables here. And once I'm done designing my table, I can then download it in Excel or CSV format. So just to show what that looks like, I've got an Excel file here that I've downloaded already, and it's got the metadata on the cover here with the contact details and all these sorts of things. I've got descriptions of the variables, and then on this final sheet, I've got the data itself. And the interesting thing here is that this Excel file, this is not being put together by hand. This is being generated on the fly in the same way as the rest of the user interface from the underlying data and from the metadata. So the metadata is loaded into the software in machine readable format along with the data, and then we can produce these outputs automatically from both the metadata and the data, combining the data together with the metadata. And that means that there isn't someone who has to go through and laboriously create these Excel files from copying and pasting from metadata sources. So hopefully all a lot more efficient as a result of that automation. So that is a quick overview of how Cantabular works and a demo. So what's next for us is that we're currently working on something called origin destination data with the ONS, also known as flow data. So these are really big data sets that break down how people commute or how people migrate between different locations. And we're building a special software tool to do this that's slightly different from some of the other software tools that we've built. Because the tables are so big, it requires a slightly different approach to the software. We're also working on, we're working with NISRA, who are the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency, to help them with produce the same kind of flexible table builder capability for the publication of the Northern Ireland census. And that's looking like it's on schedule to launch in summer. And we're also looking into improving support for magnitude data in Cantabular. So different ways of loading different types of data, continuous variables and time series variables and all that kind of stuff. So that is a quick run through of everything Cantabular. And now I'm going to see if we've got any questions. So I can see one on Slido. Are all the variables categorized, or are there more continuous variables? Well, as just very briefly touched on at the end there, you can have continuous variables. So I'll just show you an example. I can look at population density. I've got a population density table here, and we've got a number of persons per hectare. So yes, there is capability to load continuous variables in Cantabular. There's another question, which is, what does it mean a perturbed table when we ask for qualitative variables only? Does it mean some qualitative responses are false or changed on purpose? Well, what that means concretely is if I go back to the table that I just built, and I'm just going to change the pivoting here. If I look at these counts, so here we've got a count of 10,391 people, aged 16 to 24 in Hartlepool, born in the United Kingdom, with white ethnicity. And the point is that the perturbation is added to this number. So there's small amounts of perturbation can be added to these numbers, and that's completely configurable in the software. So there's uncertainty added as to whether this number is the actual number in the underlying population or not. And the purpose of this perturbation is that it helps protect against differencing attacks on the underlying data. There's a question about detailed spatial information. So if we look at, if I just zip back to this page here, the choice that like the geography variables that are available in the product are completely kind of customizable. So for the ONS, the lowest level is output area, but that is just a function of the ONS's geographies, and the software is very flexible, and you can load up whatever geography hierarchy you want to and that you have available. There's a question: how long does it take to set up the data? So how long did it take to launch the interface for ONS? So probably a good answer to that is how long it's been taking with NISRA. So we've been working with NISRA and to help them publish the census, and it's probably only about 5 or 6 months of elapsed time from when we started working with them until the software goes live, roughly speaking. Just looking at the other questions. So are the counts perturbed in a way to give the correct total? So the way the perturbation works is it's a kind of deterministic algorithm. So if you do the same query, you always get the same results. But if I were to do a query for the population by sex and then a query by age and summed the two together and compared the results, there would be slight differences because of the way the perturbation works. That was a choice that the ONS made in the design of their methodology for census, and something that they consulted their users. They consulted their users widely on that kind of question as to whether that was a kind of an acceptable compromise. Because the flip side is that yes, you do lose this additivity of totals, but you get a lot more data available as a result. Yes, someone's asked about whether it's consistent. Yes, it is consistent. So if you run the same query on 2 days, you do get the same data. There's a question about an API. So yes, absolutely, our software has an API. So if I go back to this page here, we've got a download format, which is a JSON download format, which is a kind of a more compact machine readable output. And our user interface is the URLs are completely kind of predictable. So I can change the variables that I have in the actual URL for my table to directly. So without having to go to the page and choose a different variable, I can just edit the URL directly. But as well as that capability, we also have an API. So if I can remember the URL for it. Let's see. So we have a GraphQL API that sort of reveals that same flexible capability, but through an API rather than through a user interface. And I can do exactly the same kind of thing. I can build a cross tabulation, I can filter the data, and I can get it back and plug it into visualizations or whatever else. There's a question about whether I could elaborate on the confidentiality checks. I mean, yes, but it's quite a detailed topic. So it might be something that's best left for a kind of a future conversation with you individually. The way that I suppose, just with a little bit more detail, we developed something called the disclosure rules language, which is a domain specific language that is designed for encoding disclosure rules. And the kind of things that it allows you to do is you can write rules that check your query. So when a user creates a query for a table, if they were to put in 10 variables in their query, that's almost certainly going to be too disclosive. So you can write rules that block tables that have more than a certain number of variables, or maybe at really low levels of geography, you want to only allow a certain number of variables on top. So maybe at the most detailed level, at grid square level or output area level, you'd only allow 2 or 3 variables. But if you're cross-tabulating for the whole population, maybe you're okay with that having more detail. So we have disclosure. You can write disclosure rules that control queries, but you can also write disclosure rules that evaluate tables before they're published. And those disclosure rules can look for things like the sparsity of the table, or identity disclosure, or attribute disclosure. And so there's lots of, and also things like dominance as well. So lots of things are possible. But if you're interested in that, it's probably worth sending us an email and we can have a more detailed chat. Just looking at the other questions. So there's one, is it possible to use various data sets? We have multiple data sets, and depending on researchers' use, it can be one data set or a combination of them. That is something that we could, so the way that would work at the moment is you would have a kind of pre-processing step to combine the two data sets together into one. It might be possible to do something different where you sort of combine things on the fly, but that's something that we would have to kind of look into with you. Does it allow users to customize the variable breakdown, for example, combining two age group bands into one? So the way that works at the moment is that the breakdowns are predetermined by the data owner, effectively. So in this case, the ONS has chosen specific classifications of the variables. In theory, you could, because the microdata is in there, you could have a case.
Something else I can help with.
Sorry, that was Siri butting in there. So because of the we've got the microdata loaded, in theory, there might be some way of doing that, but you'd have to think carefully about the privacy implications of doing that, I think. Yeah, so there's a comment there about, I like that you don't enforce the totals of counts to be correct, big difference to what the US Census do. So yeah, the US Census had to, because of legislation, had to ensure that certain counts were correct. And then that, I think, made it harder for them to give the kind of flexibility that some users might have wanted in the data.
Mike, we have one about the spatial, sorry, I'm not sure if I missed you answering this one, regarding, do we consider 1 kilometer grids? Did you?
I think I did answer that one.
Thank you. I just want to check. Thank you.
Yeah, it was yes, absolutely. We can. It's a sort of, it's a configuration change. Can users upload their own data set to merge with the census data set to generate more insight? Interesting idea. No, but they could, you know, there's nothing stopping you from downloading the data that you've created in Excel or CSV and combining it. I suppose that might be tricky, but yeah, at the moment that isn't possible. I mean, I suppose you'd have to have a way of merging it, and you'd need a shared identifier between the underlying microdata and whatever data you have, which is going to be a bit tricky, I would imagine. I'm just looking at the questions if there's anything else that I've missed. I don't think so.
There's one, Mike, there's just one. Is it possible to work in the organization's internal network without internet access?
Yes, absolutely. That is, so the way that we deploy the software is it doesn't have to be software as a service. It can be, but it can also be on premise. So the way we've worked with the ONS and with NISRA is that we've given them the software and they've installed it in their own environments and their own infrastructure. So the data preparation stage happens in a secure environment, running our software, all kind of hidden away from the outside world. And then when the data is ready, it can be moved into a kind of secure hosting environment where you can then allow the user interface to talk to the kind of built database with the microdata inside it. So yeah, absolutely, it can work inside an internal network. Just for a bit more context, the software is written in a language called Go, and it has this nice property that you can create executables that can run in different environments very easily, in Windows and Linux or on Mac. Is there a trial version? If so, how can it be downloaded? Well, we do have a demo loaded with some island census data, which is available at this link there. If you would like a trial version, then send us an email. We can have a chat and see what we can give to you, and we can maybe help you get it up and running as well. Do you provide any information about the degree of perturbation of table values? That's not sort of baked into the software. That is a decision for the people publishing the data. I can't remember off the top of my head if the ONS publish parameters around what degree of perturbation they're using, but it's a choice for the organization that's publishing the data. Someone's saying that it's very easy to use. The ONS system was very easy to use and very valuable, which is great to hear.
Thank you. We've had a couple of latecomers. Just to let you know, anybody who's had to, unfortunately, because of, we did have a couple of connection issues when we started, but we are recording this session and we can make it available to people if they want to share it with other colleagues or what have you, if some people had still problems getting in. I just thought I'd mention that, Mike.
There's a question about, is the system in the cloud? So as I kind of previously alluded to, the software can be deployed pretty much anywhere. So the way that we work with clients is that we give them a license for the software, and then the software they can install the software in their own environments and run it there. Or if that's not what you want, we can also run it for you in the cloud. So this system I was just demonstrating is one that we manage. It's loaded with synthetic data and it's running on Amazon's AWS in the cloud. So it can be in the cloud or it can be on your own premises if that's what you want.
And the ONS is on its own cloud infrastructure, isn't that correct, Mike? The
ONS is, that's right.
Thank you. We have one regarding perturbation parameters, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I was saying was, I don't know if they are given or not. It's a choice for the data publisher, but there's no reason why they couldn't be. The way that our metadata works is that you could, if you wanted, you could have a section in your Excel file that says, in the statistical disclosure control, you could say what the order of magnitude of the perturbation is in there for each output. So that's definitely doable. It's just a question for the organization using the software.
That's a good question.
Nice
and
question
about branding.
I would recommend, actually, if you want to find out what the answer is for the 2021 England and Wales census, maybe have a look at this link, which is a paper about disclosure control in the 2021 census.
We also have a question, Mike, about people implementing their own branding on our user interface.
Yes, absolutely. So we are working with NISRA, as I've mentioned, and they are using our user interface for their publication. And this is a kind of a screenshot of that kind of work in progress. So it's the same software as what you see here, but we've got different, it's maybe a bit hard to see, but we've got different kind of a blue footer with different links in, and there's a census logo up here, and the text is different, and the fonts are different as well. And you can also kind of add bits of content into the UI in different places. So yeah, we've put a lot of work into making sure the user interface is themable and customizable. Actually, that also, sorry, Anya, that also extends to the data downloads as well. So you can customize the metadata that appears in the cover sheet of your Excel document as well.
Mike, would it be worth just mentioning some of the work we did around right to left?
Yes, absolutely. So as well as, I think I showed earlier, actually, maybe I didn't show it, which I should have done, which is that when you're looking at let's say we're looking at this page here, we can provide this in multiple languages. So I've switched to Welsh here, and I get a list of different geography variables. And the metadata that's coming from our metadata service is also all in Welsh. So we can handle different language translations. And actually, we extended that recently to right to left language support. So we can also, I've only got a screenshot of it here, but we can also accommodate right to left languages as well in the user interface. So the whole of the user interface will kind of flip around if it's been loaded with a right to left script. Yeah, so someone's just asked about multiple languages.
Yes.
Hopefully that
Yes.
answers the question. So actually, I can just really quickly show that just as a sort of proof illustration. So that's switching it to still using Welsh rather than Arabic or Hebrew or something, but it's showing that the UI is being built so that it flips around for a different flow direction.
Looking at the questions again to make sure we've captured them all. I think we have, Mike.
Great. Yeah, maybe one last thing to mention is that as well as this mode of creating tables on the fly, we also have a method of loading up kind of pre-built tables and then being able to navigate through those. So this is a sort of an illustration of that, and I can search through these for just the tables that I'm interested in. There's a question about getting multiple languages out of the API. Yes, that is part of the way that it works. I'm just going to see if I can give you an example of that. So this is a query for same kind of thing that I was doing just now, of local authority by ethnicity by country of birth. And this is an API query and an API response. So if you're not super technical, this might not, it might be a little bit tricky to understand, but it's, we're asking for, looking at the usual resident population, asking for a table, local authority by age, by ethnicity, by country of birth. And we want the values, the counts, and we're also asking for the name, label, and description of the variables used. So here you can see we've got that description of local authority, and that's coming through from the metadata service. And so is this description here and the one below. But I can easily flip this to Welsh just by adding a language parameter on the end. So I'm just specifying a language of Welsh, and then I get the different fields coming through as Welsh. So yeah. Do we have a system architecture? Absolutely, we do, and we've got an architecture diagram floating around somewhere. I'm not sure that I have it open, but very happy to share that with you. If you want to drop us an email, we can send something through.
Mike, there's also a question about what databases does the software work with. So that's
yeah, I mean, the way that so a key part of Cantabular is that it can do these queries really quickly. So when I was demoing the software just now, and maybe I should have pointed this out a bit more clearly, but if we're looking at this table, and as I change the selection of variables, I was mentioning earlier about what's going on over here, that it's getting feedback from the disclosure rules about what areas are passing. Actually, when I make this selection, it's checking the query, it's running the cross tabulation, it's adding perturbation, and it's doing the disclosure rules check on the way out again. And that's all happening in kind of a second or less. So that is scanning over the entire kind of UK population in that timescale. So we've built the software to be really fast. And part of the way that we've done that is that we have our own kind of database format in the software. So in order to work with another database, what we would do is we'd have a kind of transformation step where we'd pull the data out of that database and load it into our format so that we can ensure that performance. No, absolutely. We offer help with the, there's a question, would I need to work out how to get all my data in the right format? Do you offer help with the transformation? Yes, we do. We're working with the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency at the moment, and we're just in the process of helping them transform their data. And the way that we approach that is, unsurprisingly, given how much I was jabbering on about automation earlier, that we try and set up pipelines to do that work. So rather than it being a kind of one-off thing, which you then kind of forget how to run and can't do again, we try and set up automated pipelines so that transformation can be done consistently and repeatably. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely we can.
Thank you, Mike. I think we've covered them all. We'll just wait for a moment or so just to make sure we don't miss any. I think we're good, Mike. I think we've got all of the questions. If anyone would like to send us an email, or if they have specific questions or you feel we haven't addressed them in the way that you wanted in today's call, by all means send us an email. And as I mentioned, we have recorded this session. We'd be happy to make the recording available to people, and if they wish to share it with colleagues or want to watch the presentation again. But by all means, please reach out to us, and we're also happy to organize calls individually with people. Great. Thank you, everyone. And we hope we'll get to speak with you or see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much, all my colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.